Hello viewers and students, my name is Eugene and I'm currently a teacher for animation and graphic design courses here at a local university in Malaysia. Now this video is going to be about how we're going to use textures that we find on the internet or perhaps even photographs that we took with our iPhone or camera and use them in our digital painting. I have two here and there will be parts of this video where I would fast forward so that you can still see my process but not actually have to just sit around and watch me paint every single stroke. Now, before we actually get to this point, okay, you need to have a base painting. Sadly, the one on the left hand side, this sword in the stone one, I managed to only save a portion of it, but let me just show you, let me just switch it all off, okay? I've got this background which is actually a mixture of my base painting and the photograph. The rock and the sword has been fully, also is the same thing, it's a combination of photograph, texture and painting. Now, the floor is what I managed to save, okay? This is how my initial floor looked like with my brushstroke. It's very rough, okay? And then I have my photographic texture that I overlaid over the top, okay? And then this is the final paint. Okay, I switched the bottom two layer off and this is the end result. And when I put them all together with the rest, this is what you get. Okay, as you can see, the photograph is there still, but it is not fully painted over. I do introduce some of my brush strokes so that the photographs become somewhat painterly. So therefore I combine both my base painting and the photograph, and then we try and meet somewhere in between so that it doesn't look like you stack your painting onto a photograph itself. Okay, now the other one, the apocalypse scene on the right hand side, now I did manage to save this step by step. So I had my sky, which is a gradient, and this was my base painting. Very, very rough, as you can see. It's just nothing but a couple of strokes. There is sand dunes in the front. I roughly know I want a building on the right hand side, a smaller one in the distance on the left. And then I added some textures and then I touched it up with more painting. Okay, so now let's start with the one on the left hand side. Now, how did I start with this? Okay, so I'm going to start from scratch. Right, so I have this background. Let's just get the size right first. Now, I'm not going to be able to paint exactly every single brushstroke, but probably something roughly about the same idea. Okay, I usually like to start with a gradient that actually shows where the light source would be. So let's switch this off, and based on that just now, I know that there is a source of light on the top right hand side which is probably yellow in color, okay, and then at the bottom side there is a cooler green color because it's kind of mysterious, closer to the ground where there's a lot of grass. Then I press OK, and then I will apply this gradient. Oops, the other way around. Okay, and the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to paint the ground. Don't mind me, this is actually one of the first few times I'm using Photoshop CC after so long. I'm one of those very stubborn users where I don't change my Photoshop version or explore new versions when they come out. It takes me quite a few years before I even dare venture in, but I saw these really cool, amazing brushes by another YouTube artist, and I just couldn't resist and downloaded them. I want to try them out. All right, so I wanted a sort of diagonal line on the ground, as if it was it was a hill of some sort. Yeah, it's a slope. All right, so I'm just going to block out the area on the bottom as my ground. All right, and that's about it. Okay, and I'm using a relatively rough brush too. And then I'm going to just change my color slightly for the rock. And for the rock, I kind of want it to be a little bit tilted like this. Yeah, as if it's going in the opposite direction of the slope of the ground. Just to give it some contrast, you know, to draw attention to this rock. You see the reason why I'm choosing this brush is because it automatically gives me all these nice gritty details that I don't need to think about when I'm when I'm painting it and not deliberately need to paint out all this gritty stuff. Then I will add in, of course, the sword. All right, and this I would have to tilt slightly, or okay, and have it. Ooh, that's a bit too much. All right. Okay, so I've got the blade there, and of course the handle. I'm not going to make these illustrations too polished because the whole idea of this video is just to tell you guys, or to kind of demonstrate you guys how you could actually use photographs and the methods. Of course, you could spend hours on these paintings and to finesse them, but sometimes don't finesse until you completely don't see your photographs anymore. Then it's completely pointless that you even started to use photographs anyway. All right. So I'm gonna just patch this up. All right. It's okay. I just drew this all. Oh, I did draw it all on one layer. I should have extracted it out, but maybe is it too late? Nah, it's still okay because they're all one flat color, thankfully. So big boo boo there. Okay, so I'm gonna select this. Oh, it selects very nicely, so I'm just gonna copy and paste this. I'm okay with having this all in one layer, but for the background, let's just do the gradient one more time. Lock this. Oops. Ooh, it actually looks quite nice like this. Perhaps we should try it like this time. Okay, so we have the sword coming. It gives it a more of a mysterious feel with the light coming down. You know, whenever we light something from the bottom, it feels almost mysterious, unnatural, sort of magical as well. All right. Okay, so now let's add a little bit of texture to these items here. We kind of need to add a bit of shadow for this rock, so it's quite simple. My brush, my color palette is usually HSB. The reason is because if let's say I have a color, I just want a darker version of it or a less saturated version, it's a lot easier to adjust from there. So I'm gonna just check on this, lower my opacity so that the brush makes gentler strokes or marks. Yeah, so I want the rock to kind of have this kind of surface where it's flat on the bottom side, and obviously there would be a highlight on this side, right? And you want to create just some form, just a hint of a form for your rock. It might be slightly darker on this mid zone here. It might be even the darkest. All right. How about your sword? Perhaps shadow, just to dictate where the light source is coming from. All right, and then the ground. Okay, with light behind, it might be darker on the top area here. All right, so let's just give it some texture on the ground. Give it some form by adding some of these lines that kind of creates undulations in the ground, like unevenness in the ground. I'm going to change up the color a bit because some parts might be earth, you know, so I'm going to just add some browns to it as well. I'm thinking that there might be shadow in this area, so most probably a darker green. Even darker. Alright. Okay. I won't spend too long on it. You could, yeah, of course. But I'll just show you how powerful it is actually. This using good source of images. The photo, I've got this whole bunch of textures, and the one I found on the internet that I want to use is this because I wanted the rock to have this hard edge, almost an angular geometric shape, and I found that I like this texture that I have. Now, usually, if I don't if I find a picture of which texture I like and color I do not like, it's still okay because I still can adjust the color, and oftentimes I don't use so much of the color because I want to dictate the color more. So I'm more after, actually when I'm looking for texture, more on the texture itself, okay? Not so much the color. So I'm going to take this texture all the way up. So I'm going to call this background, and then this is the foreground where the sword is foreground and sword, and then after that we have this texture. So this texture, what you do now in order to use this texture I'm going to use on the rock. Okay, so how do we do that is we change the transparency mode. Well, in this case, possibly I could try multiplying, but it's a little too dark, and sometimes I lower the opacity so that I can see if it matches, and I move the texture around until I get something that I like. And I think this is not bad. Sometimes you get one of those textures that are just quite good looking no matter which way you put them. And probably this is nice. Why? Because I'm kind of looking at this shadow area and kind of placing it over mine, and it kind of works right now. So I'm just gonna hold down my control key, click on the bottom foreground and sword layer, which will select the painted area. And I'm going to duplicate this texture because I'm using it for later, so just keep this as a backup. So this is the texture backup. And this one, I'm going to Control Shift I, which is inverse, and delete everything outside. So I don't want the texture on the outside. Okay, and I'm just going to rub off whatever is on the sword, and maybe even the ground as well. Probably I'm going to leave a little bit, so I'm going to lower the opacity a little and just kind of leave a little of the texture. I don't mind a bit of it because later on I'm going to put a ground texture on. So for something so gritty looking, the more texture, the better. Okay, so now I have that. And what I usually like to do is I take both what I've cropped the texture out and also the painted layer, and I usually duplicate them because I want to keep this as a backup, and then I combine this to Control E to collapse the two layers on top. So basically I took this and this. So this is the texture, layer 4 was the texture. I've duplicated that, layer 4 copy, and the foreground and sword copy as well. Take these two, collapse them, Control E, and they are now one. So I can just switch these two off because they're my backup. Now I will start painting onto the area, because what I want is not just a photo that looks like it has been plastered on. I still want parts of my paint brush to be there so that it has that painterly feel still and not look like it's part photograph. Yeah, you don't want that to happen. So what I'm doing constantly, as you can see, I've turned my brush down, the opacity down a little bit, switch this on, which is the pen pressure for the opacity, and I'm just color picking. I'm holding down my alternate and color picking colors in existing on the rock right now. Yeah, and creating much more believable surfaces. I'm just emphasizing more of the crack that is here, yeah, and making it a little bit more pronounced, okay. And I'm picking colors from all around the rock. You see, I'm always constantly just holding my alternate key, painting over areas. Over here, I'm just going to increase the amount of, because I feel that this texture actually works so well with what I wanted that I may I may not try and fix it too much, but what I'm trying to do actually is just make it not so photographic. Yeah, and that's what we Okay, I think on the bottom here might need a little bit of touch up. And you know, some parts that look too dense with the texture, I would just paint over it so that it still looks more painterly. And then I'm going to pick yellow from the lighting area, the lighter area, and kind of change it to Control Dodge. Okay, and just go around the rim. Oops, of this rock. Okay, alright. Then change it back to normal. Oops. Yeah. So what I've done is, why did I change it to color dodge, is because I wanted to have that illumination on the edge of the rock created by this light source from this bottom area here. And once I've done that, I've gotten the color of the illumination I want, I go back to normal and start color picking the color from there. And then resculpt the object, the existing object. Okay. Yeah, so then you can, if you want certain areas to be illuminated, for example, like this, you know it's facing down, then maybe you can color pick from here and create another surface there, another surface here, another surface here, and reshape the rock according to what you see fit. Alright. Okay. And of course, you can really go at this for quite a long time, especially if you want a highly detailed one, but I won't spend too long on it because the whole purpose, like I said, is to really show you how we can apply photographs very quickly to our illustrations and help enrich our illustrations very quickly. Right, I'm going to use a eraser tool because I feel that this part needs to be reshaped and just tap it. Okay, and I'm quite happy with it. See, so how were you able to make that piece of this into something like this? See, just using texture. Yeah, so you've got all these nice little details and gritty parts um, that add so much more dimension and character to this rock. You know, and I use some parts of this rock, you know, the cracks, the existing cracks on the texture that I had just now, kind of build on top of it so that it has all these nice little details right now that I did not need to kind of figure out with my head, right? Now with the blade, let's try and see if we can even use the same texture, because it looked like, you know, if you let metal sit outside for a long period of time and allow it to just oxidize, it kind of feels like that, and it has this nice green as well. Yeah, maybe something, let's just try this. I'm not going to have such a large piece of texture, just part of it, copy and paste, and then try over, was it overlay that I was using? Overlay or hard light? I think soft light? Yeah, soft light. Right. And probably not so green. Let's try and bring down the saturation of this texture because it had a lot of green in the initial texture. Okay, press OK, and once again hold down your control key, select the area, Control Shift I, Control X, cut out. Alright, and then erase off this part. And let's lower the texture. Whenever once I cut out a texture, usually and had what you call a blending mode switched on, I also like to just lower the opacity a bit so that my base painting of the sword comes through a little, though there's really not much for this. Alright, and then I will take this layer and then collapse it down to the bottom layer of my painting and do the same thing again. Okay? Alright, just hold this. Ooh, too dark. Okay, and then display, and because light is coming from here, so I'm going to switch on color dodge, pick the source of the color of the light, and just go over this area slightly, and then create nice harsh highlight to illuminate the ridge of the sword. Alright, so that piece of highlight creates some form of contrast, draws our attention to the sword. R, subdue. Okay, so it reads quite nicely, I think. Yeah. Alright, so I'm gonna just stop here for now for this one and move on. So what I basically will do for the rest is, like for this ground, it's the same process and procedure. It's just that I'm using a different texture. I've got this nice mossy floor that I've gotten from online, and what I do is, oops, sorry, just kind of skewed it a little bit too much. Okay, let's bring it in again and then scale it down, and then I put it over the area of the ground, kind of go like overlay perhaps, and then lower the opacity and just move the texture around to see what I get that best fits. Alright, you could rotate it even until you find something you like. Sometimes changing the blending mode will also help. And then I do the same procedure again. You can see that once I've done that, I always retouch the photo again. I collapse the layer, right? And then I retouch it again. And that's usually my same process every time. All right, now let's just go on very quickly to this one. All right, and this one we already have the base and the sky layer. Okay, let me just explain a little bit. I have got this, okay, the dunes I painted. Now how do I apply the texture? Now, this one is a little bit tricky because I did manipulate the photo before I even apply it straight. It was not as straightforward as the other organic one with the rock and the grass. Now this one, how do I apply a texture like this here? Okay, I actually found this nice photograph of a building that I have no idea where it's from. I think it's from Scandinavia perhaps. And for this, I think what I did was I just took the whole front of this building, yeah, not the whole portion. So I'm going to use my selection tool, okay, and just crop out a certain area until a certain floor. Oops, okay, and then I'm going to copy, after that paste it over here. Now this requires a little bit of manipulation on your end. Alright, how do I apply this texture here? So what you do is you Control T. Oh wait, before that, switch on the transparency mode. For now, you don't need to be like positively sure you're going to end up with this transparency mode, just as long as you can see through to the bottom. Alright, so it could be a multiply, it could be something easy to see. Don't use like a screen or lighten. It's a bit difficult to see. Okay, I'm going to use in this case, overlay, Control T, skew this down, okay, skew it down, and then I'm going to rotate it slightly and check if the perspective is right. In this case right now, it's not looking very right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to Control T and then kind of readjust the perspective here and then try and fit that in to this surface. And then I'm done, press enter, hold down control, select the textured area, Control Shift I and Control X, so I delete that. So you see the texture now fits. Now let's try and do it one more time. And I found the building really nice, as in you have two tones. You have the one in shadow and the one facing the light. So I'm just going to take this portion now and Control C, Control V, so that I can have it now. But I feel that one side is not enough, so I'm going to just duplicate this, actually holding it on the alternate key and duplicate and just moving it to the side. I'm going to Control T, string this down, pull this over. Oops. So I can pull both, and then let go, and then overlay a bit because I don't want to see this seam there. So I try to merge it as close as possible together, and then take the two texture, Control E to collapse them down, change the transparency mode so that I can see whatever is on the bottom, and do my adjustments accordingly. Okay, so now this one requires a little bit more skewing to fit in. Alright, so I'm going to just narrow down this side, push it in, push this down, oops, and I'm going to try and fit into this side as well, this texture on this side. Okay, so I'm done, and again, hold down Control key, select the area of the one I painted, Control Shift I and Control X. So yeah, this is just an example of how I actually use textures and manipulate them. Alright, let's just go back, and there's another method to actually manipulate textures other than this Control T. Let's say you do want to warp, well, we could use this one and use a sand dune, the picture of the sand dunes. Okay, let's say I want this lines over here. So what I do is bring this in here. So this photograph is on top. So I want these lines here. I'm going to select them all and all the way up. Oh, cut off halfway. Okay. All right. Oops. Okay. Control C, Control V. So I've got this texture now. And what I'm going to do is change again to overlay or whatever. In this case, maybe multiply might be good. Lower the opacity a little bit so that you can still see the texture. Control T to shrink it down because you want quite a bit of detail. And first, you might want to stretch it out a little bit. Now, it is not looking very smooth because it's too straight. I want it to curve. So you Control T, right? Right click on your mouse and go to warp. Once you do that, you notice that you will be able to warp your texture and create those curves so that the texture of the sand dunes, these waves, yeah, that you get will be able to curve according to the orientation that you want. Okay, and yeah, so press enter, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to just rub the areas that I don't need. Perhaps I'm going to use a softer brush so that the transition between the area that has the texture to the ones that don't is a little softer. And sometimes I might even use a softer brush to do that. And of course, there's retouching and painting after that, right? So I don't need all this area. In fact, you can just use the selection tool and delete that because it's a bit distracting as you're painting it. Okay, so you have your texture. Let's lower the opacity slightly a little bit more. And I would think I will end here right now. So of course, you would then have to do your retouching. Let's just bring up my old photographs, my painting again. So I initially had this, right? So I've applied the texture, rubbed off areas of it. And then after that, I extended these lines and created highlights and repainted over the area. Yeah, even with this building, you see I added little debris sticking out because looking at reference photos, I noticed whenever they are building rubbles, you get stuff like that sticking out over the edge at the silhouette. And that is important. That's always observation that you need to do. I added a crack through the building, some shattered windows. I could have added even more. But I just wanted to show you guys what my procedure is for adding texture to photographs, right? And how you are able to achieve something like this or something like the rock with the stone. Yeah, okay. Okay, so I hope you find this video useful. For more videos on motion graphics with Adobe After Effects or illustration methods using Adobe Photoshop like this one and Illustrator, please click the subscribe button. Do follow me also on Instagram at eugenosaurus.fu. I also have a Facebook page by the same name. Both links are in the description below. I'll see you guys again soon.